Coming up on a newscast tonight. Key officials from North Korea and the United States hold meetings in 3 separate locations to prepare for the historic Pyongyang-Washington summit. One in New York, another on the inter-Korean border, and a closed-door working-level meeting in Singapore. June 13 is when the first nationwide election under the Moon administration will be held. Candidates and their respective camps are geared up and ready to begin campaigning tomorrow. Latest data shows South Korea has overcome the impact of China's retaliatory measures targeting the country's tourism sector. Plus, for the first time in over a decade, the return rate of foreign visitors exceed 50%. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, coming to you live from our news center in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. We begin with our top story of the day. Now, summit diplomacy seems to be heating up as North Korea's former intel chief is in New York City for talks with the U.S. Secretary of State. The visit comes as multiple meetings are taking place in different locations to set the agenda for the summit and the regime's denuclearization. Oh Jung-hee has our top story.
The right-hand men of Kim Jong-un and President Trump will be meeting soon in New York. North Korea's Kim Yong-chul, the regime's former spy chief and the current director of its Department for Inter-Korean Relations, was spotted taking a flight bound for New York on Tuesday afternoon in Beijing. Trump confirmed on Twitter that Kim is coming. In Washington, State Department says Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will head over to New York on Wednesday to meet him.
The secretary will be heading up to New York tomorrow, and I believe returning sometime on Thursday.
Kim and Pompeo's talking points have not been specified, but it's widely believed that their meeting is for the final coordination of the agenda for the Pyongyang-Washington summit, how North Korea will denuclearize, and how the U.S. will guarantee the Kim Jong-un regime's security. This as an extension of North Korea-U.S. working-level talks that took place twice this week at the inter-Korean border village of Panmunjom. The delegations at Panmunjom, led respectively by Washington's former negotiator on North Korea, Song Kim, and Pyongyang's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee, met on Sunday and Wednesday.
Well, this will be the secretary's third meeting with Kim Yong-chul. They've had obviously very deep conversations where they've talked about a lot of detail about what the United States' expectations are.
If Kim Yong-chul and Mike Pompeo settled on a basic draft of their agreement and President Trump accepts it, then that will lead to a confirmation that the summit will take place for sure. The fact that Kim Yong-chul is visiting the U.S., that in itself means that coordination between the two is almost over, with only a few factors left to be resolved.
Kim Yong-chul is the first high-level North Korean official to step foot on U.S. soil in 18 years. Attention is on whether he'll meet with U.S. President Donald Trump and deliver a letter from Kim Jong-un, much like when Pompeo twice met with the North Korean leader in Pyongyang. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Officials from Pyongyang and Washington are not only rushing to work out the details and make sure the summit happened in New York and Korea. Apparently, they've met behind closed doors in Singapore, where the historic event would be held. Oh Seung-young has the highlights from the significance of this gathering.
Top North Korean and U.S. officials appear to be working on the more technical aspects of the historic summit slated for June 12th. Kim Jong-un's de facto chief of staff Kim Chang-son was seen Wednesday leaving his hotel in downtown Singapore at around 9:45 a.m. A team of U.S. officials were also spotted leaving their hotel in the island of Sentosa around the same time. The two parties are believed to have met at Singapore's foreign ministry, with local officials also in attendance. The U.S. delegation is led by White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations Joe Hagan. He's reportedly met with Kim Chang-son the day before as well for the first round of working-level talks to iron out the practical details of the summit. These include the specific venue and timetable, as well as the protocol and security measures. Possible venues include the Shangri-La Hotel and the resort island of Sentosa, but it seems unlikely to be at Singapore's presidential office. Local media on Wednesday quoted Singaporean diplomat Ong Keng-yong, who said that the presidential palace of Istana was not appropriate with the summit, suggesting that foreign officials should not intrude in the working space of the country's leaders. With less than 2 weeks to go until the envisioned meeting, experts say the summit will practically be set in stone once practical arrangements are made, and once the North and the US have agreed on the key topics of discussion, primarily the terms of denuclearization. Arirang News.
North Korea and the United States still have a wide difference in views on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but it's possible to narrow that gap. That's according to Seoul's Unification Minister, who shared his views during a meeting with EU ambassadors to the nation. Cho Myung-gyun believes even after Pyongyang and Washington agreed to hold the summit, they weren't well aware of each other's stances and therefore had some temporary ups and downs. But he pointed out both leaders taking part in the ongoing discussions with a top-down approach raises the possibility of finding some middle ground. The minister added his government feels it's best to strike the deal at once to sort out the North Korea's denuclearization and America's guarantee of regime security. The nation's defense minister is slated to participate in Asia's largest annual security forum later this week. During the Shangri-La dialogue, Song Young-moo will call for close cooperation among participants to achieve a successful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The Ministry of National Defense announced today at the 17th Asia Security Summit the defense chief will address the forum on the significance of the recent inter-Korean talks, as well as the developments on the peninsula. Defense ministers, key officials, and security experts from over 30 Asian and European countries are set to attend the forum. Song is also expected to hold bilateral talks with his American counterpart, James Mattis, on the sidelines of that event. Following the three-day forum, the minister is also scheduled to visit Vietnam at the invitation of his counterpart in that country. Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov will be traveling to Pyongyang on Thursday, according to TASS news agency. The visit comes at the invitation of North Korea's foreign minister. It's in return for the visit to Moscow made in April by Ri Yong-ho. The agenda is not yet known, but the two are likely to focus on the progress made towards holding a North Korea-U.S. summit, as well as bilateral relations. Just last week, President Trump canceled the hotly anticipated summit, only to hint at the possibility of reinstating it within hours after making that statement. The flurry of preparatory meetings are being held to make up for lost time. Lee Ji-won delves deeper into how these sessions are boosted by his shakeup.
The North Korea-U.S. summit was on and then off, but now preparations for it have been coming fast. Experts attribute that to change in attitude from the North.
Before, North Korea would not show up to meetings and play hard to get, and it did that again a few weeks ago, according to a White House official, by not going to Singapore. But with Trump's sudden cancellation of the meeting, the North has been active in expressing its determination that the talks go ahead.
Thanks to the shake-up, experts also say finding a consensus now would have become much easier.
The U.S. seems to have the upper hand in the situation with the North as of now, so it's expected that Pyongyang has agreed to a lot of what Washington wants.
This could mean, says the expert, that the North might have accepted what it has reportedly been sensitive about, the so-called front-loaded agreement.
Considering how the inspection and verification of nuclear facilities takes a long time, it's likely that the U.S. requested that the North move all of its ready-made nuclear warheads outside of its borders. And while the regime seems to have protested this, it may have agreed in view of the fact that the summit preparations have resumed.
But it's not that the North has to fit itself perfectly into a framework set up by the U.S. against its will. In fact, the North showed satisfaction with and anticipation for the so-called Trump model after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's second visit to Pyongyang, where the regime state-run Rodong Shinmun said Pompeo and leader Kim Jong-un reached a satisfactory agreement.
Before Trump called off the meeting, he had hinted on numerous occasions that the talks were going well. And I think it's because the two reached some sort of common understanding and prior agreement that the latest preparations were able to proceed rapidly and simply continue from where they had left off.
And some say the latest Panmunjom talks' inclusion of Song Kim, the former U.S. ambassador to South Korea and former nuclear negotiator, could have been meant to better fine-tune the details.
The main structures of the deal are already likely to have been settled by the White House and Pompeo. And now for the details, and to get Pyongyang's agreement and understanding in that process, it seems Sung Kim has been called in with his ample experience in dealing with the North and as the only Korean speaker in the State Department.
Experts say that with what look like the finishing touches being made, they're hopeful that a satisfactory deal will be laid out by North Korea and the U.S. in just a few weeks. 이지원, Arirang News.
The official campaigning period for the June 13th local election starts tomorrow. With exactly 2 weeks left until Koreans head to the polls, rival parties are pulling out all the stops to woo voters. The people will choose mayors, governors, chiefs of local councils, and education superintendents who will represent them for the next 4 years. The result will reflect public sentiment towards the government, as this is the first nationwide election under the Moon Jae-in administration. The Democratic Party should feel confident of a landslide victory, considering the high approval rating of the president, his administration, and the ruling bloc. By-elections will also be held in 12 districts nationwide. The South Korean government's dedication to support innovative growth and improve the job market doesn't end there. Another new measure included making changes to the national contract law. Kim Hye-sung explains how it will work.
The government is putting forward a revised bill on bidding methods. The Finance Ministry says the revision to the national contract law includes a so-called competitive dialogue bidding system to help foster purchases of innovative goods and services. Under the system, bidders will directly communicate with the ordering body to identify the best way to satisfy their needs and to find the most qualified bidder. The government will also allow private contracts between R&D manufacturers and government institutions to help public purchases of innovative goods.
Introducing a competitive bidding system is a move in the right direction that will help raise quality. But private contracts don't have a bidding system. There would need to be more specific criteria and evaluation methods for private contracts. Otherwise, it could open the door to corruption or bribery in the contract winning process.
To prevent purchases of low-cost, low-quality goods, the ministry says existing low-cost bidding contracts on goods below 210 million Korean won or $194,000 will be abolished. Instead, the government will apply competitive bidding methods for startups and venture companies on contracts below 100 million won or around $92,000. There will also be clearer standards on contract unit prices. In addition, social enterprises and companies that create more jobs will be given extra bidding benefits. For companies with a history of labor law violations, bidding qualification limits will be extended from 1 month to 3 months. The revised bill is expected to be proclaimed and implemented later this year. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
Starting July, the 52-hour maximum work week system will be enforced here in Korea. According to our Kim Mo-kyun, the nation's conglomerates are now scrambling to make sure they are well prepared for this major change.
Under the new regulations, employees working for firms with more than 300 workers will only be permitted to work 40 hours a week, plus a maximum of 12 hours paid overtime from July 1st, sharply fewer hours than most have been used to since entering the workforce. Tech giant Samsung Electronics says it will revamp its working hours by allowing employees to decide their hours on a daily basis on the condition that they work at least 4 hours a day. Samsung has also decided to adopt a discretionary system for employees who work on high-intensity projects where they can readjust their hours with their managers. The country's biggest automaker, Hyundai Motor, has also adjusted its system by making it mandatory for workers to work from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., but giving them room to adjust their schedule for the rest of the day. Other large firms such as LG Electronics say they have been preparing for the system by allowing their employees the flexibility to work between 4 to 12 hours a day. Korea's largest wireless carrier, SK Telecom, has adopted a system where employees can arrange their own working hours on a 2-week basis. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
Statistics Korea unveiled what the average household here in the nation spent per month. Last year, the number stood at slightly over $2,300, with transportation expenses taking up the lion's share. Here's Park Hyo-jun with a breakdown of the data.
South Korean households spent an average of roughly $2,370 a month last year. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, single-person households spent an average of $1,270 a month, while four-person households spent $3,500 a month. Families where the head of the household is in their 40s spent the most, on average $2,930 a month, followed by those with heads in their 50s. Households with heads in their 30s or younger spent $2,310 a month on average, and those with heads in their 60s or older spent the least, spending just $1,670 a month. Transportation was the biggest expense, taking up $340 a month, or 14.4% of the total average budget, followed by groceries and non-alcoholic beverages with 14.1%, or $330. Travel-related spending made up 13.9% of the spending, or $327 a month. Statistics Korea said annual or quarterly comparison data could not be provided due to changes in the evaluation system, and that it will be released at a later date. Park Hyo-jun, Arirang News.
Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy and affiliated institutions plan to spend more than $23.5 billion to help create jobs. It's a massive amount equivalent to nearly 1.5% of the country's GDP, reflecting the government's resolve to help fix the nation's employment crisis. The ministry itself is planning to apportion half of its own budget of $6.2 billion to job creation, up from just 11% currently. It also plans to provide incentives for companies with excellent track records in job creation. That's expected to create 35,000 jobs over the next 5 years. The rest of the huge sum is from other related institutions. Their 5-year plan is aimed at adding some 90,000 jobs, mostly in the energy sector and the public sector. The latest estimate for the nation's economic growth this year is 3%. That's according to the OECD, which kept its outlook steady. If that figure is correct, it would be a decline from last year's figure, 3.1%. As for the global economy, the OECD expects it to strengthen in 2018 and next year, citing a recent pickup in investment and better employment numbers among member nations. The global forecast of 3.8% was down 0.1% from earlier predictions, but the OECD still expects growth to reach 3.9% next year. One risk pointed out is over-dependence on government spending. After 22 years of operation, GM Korea's factory in Gunsan will close tomorrow, part of an agreement reached by the Korean government and the General Motors on how to rescue GM's local subsidiary. After the auto giant announced on February 13th its plan to shut down its Gunsan plant, the local community and the South Korean government tried to push ahead with their plan to get the factory back online. Unfortunately, such efforts came up short. The factory will officially shut down on Thursday. However, it hasn't been operating for almost 3 months since the closure was announced. Just 10 days after Washington and Beijing agreed not to impose new duties on each other, the White House says it will press ahead with tariffs against Chinese technology goods. Cha Sang-mi zooms in on how the Trump administration is trying to gain leverage in its talks with Beijing.
The U.S.-China trade war appeared to have died down until on Tuesday when the White House announced that it is moving ahead with plans to impose a hefty 25% tariff on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods containing industrially significant technology. The White House says the final list of imports covered by the measures will be announced by June 15th, and the tariffs will be imposed shortly thereafter. It added that the products included on the list are related to the Made in China 2025 program, a 2015 initiative promoting China's tech industries, including the information technology, robotics, and biomedical sectors. A representative for China's Ministry of Commerce said Beijing was surprised by the White House statement. In a statement released by the Commerce Ministry, Beijing stressed its confidence and capability to defend its own national interests, regardless of what measures the U.S. will take, and urged Washington to act according to their joint statement. This comes after a second round of talks in Washington earlier this month, where the two sides issued a joint statement vowing not to launch a trade war against each other, as Beijing agreed to significantly increase its purchases of American goods and services to help the U.S. reduce its $375 billion worth trade deficit with China. The trade tensions began earlier this year, with President Trump imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum imports into the U.S., with China striking back with additional tariffs on 128 U.S. products. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Last year, the number of foreigners visiting the nation plunged mainly due to China's ban on the sale of group tour packages, part of retaliatory measures against Seoul over a defense upgrade Beijing perceives as a security threat. The tourism sector is recovering well now, though. We're also learning that the majority of the visitors are not flying in for the first time. Kang Young-moo help us look beyond the digits.
The number of foreign visitors to South Korea fell by more than 1 million in 2017 compared to the previous year. But according to a survey by the Korea Tourism Organization, 1 out of every 2 foreigners who visited South Korea in 2017 had visited the country at least once before. This marks the first time in 12 years that the return rate of foreign tourists has exceeded 50%. The average number of visits by international visitors to South Korea in 2017 was 4.1, a 13% increase from the previous year.
Last year, I've been here once, and this is my second time.
Many of the tourists who make repeat trips to South Korea come here for shopping, with Myeongdong being one of the main attractions. The survey shows that Myeongdong was the most visited site by international tourists in Seoul, and shopping was the most popular activity, with 72.5% of tourists surveyed choosing it as one of their favorite activities.
So I'd probably do a little bit of shopping and probably find a souvenir or two for my family to take home.
Yeah, it's a good place because we can find everything in the street. The store are open late at night, so it's great for us.
But experts say the lower total number of tourists could be behind the high proportion of return visitors.
Last year, if we are calculating proportions, the decreasing number of group tours naturally led to the increased revisiting rate because group tours are usual for first-timers. As the total number of foreign tourists went down, the return rate may not mean much.
And if the number of group tourists increases in 2018, the return rate may go back down. So experts say it is better to focus on the long term rather than on the annual figures. Kang Young-moo, Arirang News.
The Foreign Ministry launched a safety center for overseas Korean nationals. It's expected to operate 24/7, monitoring accidents and events that could affect Koreans residing abroad. Featuring a hotline service, the center will provide real-time safety measures and guidelines as well as support to victims and their families in times of need. The launch of this facility falls in line with President Moon Jae-in's efforts to boost safety measures and protection for citizens living abroad. Time to turn to Michelle back at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, in Seoul it was sunny, but it was raining in some other regions, I believe.
That's right, Daniel. As the weather transitions from spring to summer, the atmosphere is very unstable, so it's constantly forming rain clouds over the peninsula. Now, the northern Gangwon province and the southeast regions will receive showers. For some regions, there's a possibility that the rain turns into hail. The nation will be scorching hot under sunny skies tomorrow. However, due to the smog that's going to be blowing in tonight, the dust levels will be high in the morning, so take your masks on your way outside. The morning temperature in Seoul starts off to 14 degrees Celsius. Daegu starts at 16, Gyeongju at 15 degrees. The daily highs for Seoul tops out to 27 degrees. Gwangju hits 28, while Busan looks a little cooler at 24 degrees. Get ready to face hotter weather on Friday, which will be marking up to 30 degrees during the day, and Seoul and the next few days will be sunny with high UV levels. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's it for tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for watching.